That night, just as my husband Marcus and our daughter Emily had gone to bed, the phone rang in the darkness. At first, I thought it was a wrong number who would call so late, with thunder shaking the windows and rain pounding the roof. But when I lifted the receiver, a trembling voice whispered my name. "Aunt Evelyn, they locked me up. I'm so hungry. I'm so scared." It was Zoe, my 6-year-old niece. Her voice cracked, then the line went dead. For a moment, I froze, staring at the silent phone as if it could give me answers. My pulse hammered in my ears. Zoe wasn't a child who made up stories. If she said she was locked up, she was. I dialed my parents' number, but no one answered. Panic rose inside me like floodwater. I grabbed my keys, whispering to myself, "Hold on, Zoe. I'm coming." My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 35 years old, and until that stormy night, I believed my life was steady, predictable, almost boring in the best possible way. I worked as an English teacher at a middle school in Lexington, Kentucky. My days were filled with essays to grade, lesson plans to design, and the chatter of restless students who sometimes drove me crazy but often made me laugh. In the evenings, I came home to a modest 2-story house where my husband Marcus would be tinkering with his guitars, and our 9-year-old daughter Emily would be sprawled on the living room rug, drawing colorful animals in her sketchbook. Marcus and I had been married for 12 years. He wasn't perfect, but he was solid, a man who showed his love, not in grand gestures but in the way he brewed my coffee every morning or slipped encouraging notes into Emily's lunchbox. Our weekends were simple: grocery shopping at the local market, taking Emily to her soccer practice, or visiting the library downtown where she insisted on checking out more books than she could possibly finish. We weren't wealthy, but our lives felt full, safe, warm, and yet, in the corners of my heart, shadows lingered. I had a younger sister, Rachel, who lived in Nashville. She was always the star of the family, beautiful, spontaneous, the one everyone admired. When she married David, a talented young architect, and later gave birth to Zoe, I was proud. My niece was a radiant child with wide brown eyes and a laugh that could light up any room. But life has a way of fracturing what looks perfect. When David was killed in a car accident, Rachel's world collapsed. I tried to be there for her, calling every night, driving down when I could, bringing groceries and comforting words. But grief devoured her. Soon she began leaning on wine bottles and prescription pills, numbing herself while Zoe clung to her side, bewildered and frightened. The last time I saw Rachel before she disappeared, she looked like a ghost of herself, her once bright eyes dull, her body frail. She hugged Zoe mechanically, as though she were too exhausted to feel. I remember leaving her house with a knot in my stomach, telling Marcus that I was scared for my sister, scared for her child. And then, one summer morning, Rachel was gone. She left Zoe with our parents, my mother and father, Frank and Linda, and vanished without explanation. My parents promised they would take care of her. They applied for guardianship, even received a stipend from the state to help with expenses. At the time, I convinced myself this arrangement was for the best. They had raised 2 daughters. After all, surely, they could manage one small girl. I told myself Zoe was safe with them. I told myself I could trust my parents. But even back then, a whisper inside me asked, "Are you sure?" Rachel had always been the golden one. Growing up, people would stop my mother in the grocery store just to tell her how beautiful her younger daughter was. She was the girl who won homecoming queen, who sang solos in the church choir, who turned heads without even trying. I loved her, of course, but I would be lying if I said I never felt like I lived in her shadow. When she married David, it felt like a fairy tale had been written just for her. He was steady, ambitious, and adored her completely. Together they bought a brick home in Nashville, filled with laughter and music. Zoe was born when Rachel was 27, and I can still remember the first time I held her in the hospital. Her tiny fingers gripped mine as if she already knew she had captured my heart. For a few years, everything seemed perfect. I visited often, bringing Emily to play with her little cousin. We'd sit on Rachel's porch drinking lemonade while the children chased bubbles in the yard. Rachel glowed then, her long hair shining in the sunlight, her laughter echoing through the neighborhood. I believed she had it all. Then came the accident. It was a Saturday evening. David was driving Zoe home from a birthday party when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact killed him instantly. Miraculously, Zoe walked away with only bruises. "But Rachel," she shattered. I remember the phone call. Her voice was unrecognizable, broken into fragments. I drove to Nashville as fast as I could, but by the time I arrived, she was curled in a hospital chair, rocking back and forth, repeating the same words. "He's gone. He's gone. He's gone." The weeks that followed were a blur. Rachel tried to keep up appearances, enrolling Zoe in preschool, going back to her office job. But I could see the cracks forming. First it was wine at dinner. Then it was bottles hidden in cupboards. When the prescriptions came, her decline sped up. She would slur on the phone late at night, asking me if I thought life had any meaning left. I tried everything. I offered to bring her to live with me in Lexington. I begged her to enter therapy. Marcus even volunteered to drive her to rehab himself. But Rachel always brushed me off. "I'm fine," she'd insist, her words wobbling like glass on the verge of shattering. The last time I saw her, it was a sticky July afternoon. Zoe was 3, playing with a worn-out teddy bear in the corner. Rachel sat slumped on the couch, her hair unwashed, her hands trembling as she lit another cigarette. When I confronted her, she burst into tears, promising me she would do better. I hugged her, whispered that she wasn't alone, but the truth was I didn't know how to save her. And then one morning, she was simply gone. A short note left on my parents' doorstep said she needed time to heal. She left Zoe, standing there with her teddy bear clutched tight, looking lost and afraid. From that day forward, my parents became Zoe's guardians. I wanted to believe it was only temporary, that Rachel would come back ready to be the mother her daughter needed. But deep inside, I feared I had already lost my sister forever. When my parents, Frank and Linda, filed for guardianship of Zoe, I tried to convince myself it was the right decision. They had raised 2 daughters, me and Rachel. They knew what it meant to care for a child. Besides, the court granted them a monthly stipend of $500 to cover Zoe's food, clothing, and school expenses. On paper, it looked secure and reasonable. At first, things seemed fine. My mother would call, her voice cheerful, telling me she had baked cookies for Zoe or bought her a new dress. My father bragged about taking her to the park. I clung to these updates like a lifeline, eager to believe that Zoe was adjusting, that her childhood hadn't been stolen entirely by tragedy. When I visited those early months, Zoe still smiled. Emily and she would play in the backyard, chasing each other until their cheeks flushed pink. Watching them, I felt relief. My daughter had a cousin to grow up with, and my niece still had laughter in her despite everything. But over time, the glow began to fade. The first time I noticed something wrong was during a visit one spring afternoon. Zoe was sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. Her cheeks looked thinner, her eyes dimmer. When I asked what she'd eaten that day, she whispered, "Bread and cheese." I frowned, turning to my mother. She laughed it off, waving her hand. "She's just a picky eater, Evelyn. You know how kids are." I wanted to believe her, but unease stirred in me. On another visit, I noticed new handbags lined up neatly in my mother's closet. My father boasted about the large television they had just purchased and dinners they enjoyed with friends. My gaze drifted to Zoe, who sat silently at the table, pushing crumbs of bread around her plate. A cold thought crept into my mind. Where was the stipend money going? I began calling more often, checking in. My mother's answers grew brisk, as though she wanted to end the conversation quickly. My father sounded defensive when I suggested Zoe spend a week with me in Lexington. "She's used to us," he said sharply. "Besides, you and Marcus are too busy. Don't worry, she's fine here." But I did worry. Each time I saw Zoe, she seemed a little smaller, her voice quieter. One evening, after Emily and I drove home from visiting, Emily asked, "Mom, why doesn't Zoe smile much anymore?" My chest tightened. How could I explain to a 9-year-old what I barely understood myself? Guilt gnawed at me. I wanted to take Zoe in, to scoop her up and bring her into our warm home where Marcus played guitar, and Emily laughed at cartoons. But my parents had the legal papers, and I didn't want to believe they would neglect their granddaughter. They were my mother and father, after all. Still, the doubt kept whispering louder each day. What if they weren't telling me the truth? The little things piled up, and each one cut deeper than the last. On one visit, I found Zoe wearing the same faded dress she'd had months earlier. It hung loosely on her frame, her shoulders bony, her knees scraped. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her pale face. "Sweetheart, what did you have for lunch today?" Her eyes darted to my mother before she whispered, "Just some crackers." I glanced at the kitchen. The cupboards were nearly bare except for instant noodles and half a loaf of bread. Yet, sitting in the corner of the living room, gleaming beneath the lamplight, was a brand-new leather recliner my father had proudly purchased. The contrast made my stomach churn. "Evelyn, don't fuss," my mother said, her tone clipped. "She's a picky eater, and besides, she's perfectly healthy." She waved me off with the same dismissive gesture I'd come to dread. But Zoe's hollow eyes told a different story. One evening, when I suggested taking Zoe home with me for a week, my father's reaction was unusually sharp. "She's fine here. Why would you want to disrupt her routine?" His voice carried an edge of hostility that made Emily shrink back against my side. I tried to argue, insisting it would be good for Zoe to play with Emily, but my mother quickly shut it down. "No, Evelyn. She's attached to me. Don't confuse her by dragging her around." Dragging her around? She was a little girl, not a burden. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Marcus breathing steadily beside me. I whispered into the darkness, "Am I imagining this? Or is something really wrong?" The voice inside me screamed that I wasn't imagining it, but another voice, the obedient daughter still wanting to trust her parents, begged me to let it go. I wanted so badly to believe they loved her. After all, they were her grandparents. They had raised Rachel and me. Surely they wouldn't let Zoe suffer. But the cracks widened each time I visited. Zoe grew quieter. She no longer rushed to greet Emily at the door. Instead, she sat curled up in the corner with her teddy bear, her eyes vacant. Once, as I tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, she whispered so faintly, I almost didn't hear it, "Aunt Evelyn, I want to live with you." My heart splintered. I promised her softly, "Someday, sweetheart, just wait a little longer." But even as the words left my lips, I felt like a liar. I tried calling more often, but my mother always had ready answers. "She just ate a big meal," or "She's out playing in the yard." Her tone was defensive, rushed. My father grew curt, insisting everything was fine. Still, guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. Each night, after Emily had gone to bed, I would sit by the window, replaying Zoe's frail face in my mind. I wondered if I was failing her the same way Rachel had. I told myself, tomorrow I'll push harder. Tomorrow I'll demand the truth. But tomorrow never came. It was the kind of night when even the bravest soul would rather stay in bed. Rain hammered against the windows like 1,000 small fists, and thunder rolled through the hills around Lexington with a voice that shook the walls. Marcus had just turned off the lamp, and Emily was snuggled under her blankets, her soft breathing already steady. I sat in the living room, grading a stack of essays, when the phone shrilled through the storm. The sound startled me so violently I dropped my pen. At first, I considered letting it ring, but something inside told me to answer. "Hello?" My voice was a whisper, cautious not to wake Marcus or Emily. On the other end came a sound that froze my blood, the trembling voice of a child. "Aunt Evelyn." My heart lurched. "Zoe?" Her next words cracked through the line like lightning. "They locked me up. I'm starving. Please. I'm so scared." And then, silence. The line went dead, leaving me clutching the receiver, staring into the storm-darkened room. My breath came fast and shallow. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard. Maybe it was a nightmare bleeding into reality. But no, Zoe's voice was unmistakable, thin and desperate, the kind of voice that doesn't lie. I redialed the number, hands shaking so badly I could hardly press the buttons. It rang and rang, unanswered, until the automated message droned that the person wasn't available. My stomach knotted with panic. I tried my parents' home line, then my mother's cell phone. Nothing. Not even voicemail. Terror crawled through me. I stormed into the bedroom, flicking on the light. Marcus squinted against the glare. Evelyn? What's wrong? Zoe called. I gasped, my voice breaking. She said she's locked up, she's hungry. Marcus, something's wrong. I have to go to Nashville. He sat up, stunned. Wait, you're sure? Maybe she was just frightened of the storm. No. I shook my head so hard my hair slapped my cheeks. Zoe doesn't make up stories like that. And my parents aren't answering. I can't just sit here. Marcus swung his legs out of bed, his face tense. At least call the police first. I don't have time. I grabbed my jacket and car keys, ignoring the way my hands trembled. Stay here with Emily. If anything happens, I'll call. Marcus caught my wrist, his grip firm but his eyes filled with worry. Drive carefully. Please. The moment I stepped outside, the storm nearly knocked me back. Sheets of rain pounded the driveway. I climbed into the car, fumbling with the ignition. My wipers screeched across the windshield but barely cleared a view through the downpour. As I pulled onto the highway, the tires hissed over the slick pavement, and the storm swallowed me whole. Every mile between Lexington and Nashville stretched endlessly. My headlights cut weak tunnels into the darkness, but beyond them the world was chaos, branches scattered across the road, lightning splitting the sky. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as Zoe's voice replayed in my head. They locked me up. I'm starving. Guilt slammed into me like wave after wave. How many times had I ignored the warning signs? How often had I told myself that my parents were fine, that Zoe was safe with them? I thought of her thin frame, her whispered plea to live with me, the sadness in her eyes. My chest ached so fiercely, I thought I might collapse right there on the road. Hold on, Zoe, I whispered into the storm, my voice trembling. Just hold on, I'm coming. I dialed my parents' numbers again, over and over, but only emptiness answered. At one point, my mother's line clicked, then dropped as if she had deliberately rejected the call. Fury burned through my fear. How could they ignore me when their granddaughter was crying for help? The drive, usually just under 4 hours, felt endless. Every roar of thunder sounded like a countdown, every flash of lightning like a reminder that I might already be too late. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the car fishtailing briefly before catching the wet pavement again. At last, I pulled into my parents' neighborhood in Nashville. The familiar houses were shrouded in darkness, the storm still raging. Their old clapboard house loomed ahead, its windows black, its porch empty. Not a single light glowed inside. I leapt from the car, rain soaking me instantly to the bone. My shoes slapped against the flooded walkway as I pounded on the front door. Mom, Dad, open the door! My fists ached, but only the wind and rain answered me. I circled to the back. The yard was drowned in shadows. The door was bolted shut. My heart raced. If Zoe had called from here, then where was she now? Lightning lit up the sky, illuminating a rock near the garden. My breath hitched. Without hesitation, I seized it, raising it high before slamming it into the side window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards scattering into the storm. I cleared the frame with my sleeve, climbed through, and landed on the creaking floorboards of my childhood home. The familiar smell of old wood and mildew filled my lungs, but it carried no comfort. My flashlight beam quivered across the darkened living room. Zoe? My voice broke as I called out into the silence. No answer, only the storm outside and the hammering of my own heart. I pressed forward, each step echoing with dread, knowing I was about to uncover something that would change everything forever. The house was swallowed in darkness, as if the storm itself had drained all life from it. My flashlight beam flickered across familiar furniture, the threadbare sofa where I once curled up as a girl with library books, the grandfather clock standing silently in the corner. But the air felt wrong, stale, heavy, suffocating. Zoe? My voice cracked, too fragile to echo. I moved through the first floor, pushing open the kitchen door. The sink was piled with dirty dishes, crusted with food long dried. The refrigerator hummed faintly, but inside it held little more than a half-empty carton of milk and a few rotting vegetables. My stomach knotted tighter. This wasn't a home, it was a shell. I checked the dining room, the bathroom, the guest bedroom. Nothing. Each room stretched the silence further until it pressed against my chest like a weight. Then, faintly, I heard it. A sound so soft I thought at first it was the storm whining through the walls. But when I held my breath, I heard it again. A whimper, a stifled sob. "Zoe?" I whispered, spinning toward the staircase. I climbed 2 steps at a time, my flashlight trembling with my shaking hands. At the top of the landing, the sound grew clearer. It was coming from the end of the hallway from the small storage room my parents rarely used. The doorknob rattled when I tried it. Locked. My pulse roared in my ears. I pressed my cheek to the wood. "Zoe, are you in there?" A voice, weak and broken, floated back. "Aunt Evelyn, I'm here." I nearly collapsed with relief and horror all at once. "Hold on, baby. I'm getting you out." I stepped back, raised my foot, and slammed it against the door. Once, twice. On the third kick, the frail hinges gave way, the door splintering inward. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom and froze. Zoe was curled up on the cold wooden floor, a thin blanket tangled around her small frame. Her hair hung in limp strands around her face. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin ghostly pale, her eyes wide and sunken. In her arms, she clutched her teddy bear as though it were the last thread keeping her anchored to this world. For a moment, I couldn't move. My throat closed, and hot tears blurred my vision. "You finally came," she whispered, her voice so faint I had to crouch down to hear. "I thought you forgot me." The words pierced me deeper than any knife. I gathered her into my arms, and the shock of her weight, or rather, her lack of it, made me gasp. She felt frighteningly light, fragile as a bird's skeleton. Her body trembled with cold, her skin clammy against my soaked jacket. "No, sweetheart," I choked, holding her tight. "I could never forget you. You're safe now. I've got you." Her tiny fingers clung to my shirt as though she feared I'd vanish. "I'm so hungry," she breathed. I looked around the room. In one corner lay a plate with nothing but crumbs of stale bread. An old flip phone, scratched and nearly dead, sat beside it, no doubt the one she had used to call me. My stomach heaved with rage. How long had she been locked in here? How many nights had she cried in the dark, her tiny voice drowned out by the storm? A fury I'd never known burned in me, hot enough to light the entire house. But this wasn't the time to rage. This was the time to save her. I wrapped my jacket around her shivering body, lifted her into my arms, and carried her down the stairs as she pressed her face against my shoulder. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet felt like a condemnation of my parents. When I stepped back into the storm, the rain drenched us both instantly, but I didn't care. I shielded Zoe with my jacket, rushing to the car. I laid her gently in the back seat, covering her with a blanket I kept in the trunk. She whimpered softly, then whispered, "Don't let them lock me up again." "They never will," I vowed, my voice breaking. "Not ever again." I sped through the rain-slick streets to the nearest hospital in Nashville. My tires splashed through puddles, my wipers fighting to keep up, but nothing could drown out the image of Zoe on that cold floor. Inside the emergency room, nurses rushed to meet us. They lifted Zoe from my arms and placed her on a stretcher. The harsh white lights revealed every rib beneath her skin, every bruise of neglect. My heart shattered anew. A nurse touched my arm. "Are you her mother?" I shook my head, tears streaking my face. "Her aunt, Evelyn Harper." "Then stay close. We'll take care of her now." I watched through the glass as doctors swarmed around Zoe, inserting IV lines, checking vitals. My hands trembled so badly I had to press them against my knees to stop shaking. In that moment, standing in a hospital hallway drenched and trembling, one truth burned clear. My parents had failed Zoe, and if I didn't fight for her now, she might never survive. The next morning, after a sleepless night at the hospital, I knew what I had to do. The doctors had confirmed what my eyes already told me. Zoe was suffering from severe malnutrition and psychological trauma. This wasn't a temporary mishap, it was neglect. Deliberate, prolonged neglect. I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a notebook open before me. Coffee untouched, my hands still trembling. Marcus had driven down from Lexington with Emily, so they could be close, and his steady presence gave me strength. But my heart still thundered with fear. If I didn't act fast, Zoe could be sent back into the very hands that had starved her, so I began gathering evidence. First, I went back to my parents' house while they were away. The broken window I had climbed through was still jagged, rain still dripping inside. I headed straight for my father's desk, rifling through drawers until I found a stack of bank statements. The stipend money, $500 every month, was there, clear as day. But the transactions that followed made my stomach churn. Cash withdrawals, restaurant bills, shopping sprees, even a weekend getaway to Memphis. There wasn't a single receipt for children's clothes, school supplies, or nutritious food. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking as I flipped page after page. Next, I searched my mother's bedroom. Rows of new handbags, high-end shoes, and a fur coat stared back at me from the closet. Luxury bought with money meant to feed Zoe. The injustice was so raw that I had to lean against the wall to catch my breath. When I left the house, I went to the neighbor, Mrs. Carson, an elderly woman who often sat knitting on her porch. At first, she hesitated, but when I explained that I wanted to protect Zoe, her eyes softened. "I've heard her crying many nights," she admitted, "sometimes begging for food. Once I tried to bring her cookies, but your mother wouldn't let her take them. They'd often leave her alone for hours at a time." Her words stabbed like knives, but I thanked her, promising to write down her statement. Then came the school. I contacted Zoe's teacher, Miss Lauren Hayes, at Maplewood Elementary. Her voice was weary but compassionate. "We've been very worried. Zoe has missed over 90% of her classes this term. We sent letters and made calls, but your parents always said she was sick. They never provided any medical documentation." She emailed me the official attendance records, along with her notes describing Zoe as withdrawn, underweight, and often exhausted on the rare days she attended. Reading those words, I felt both vindicated and devastated. Armed with evidence, I reached out to Sofia Ramirez, a family law attorney recommended by Marcus's colleague. She was sharp-eyed, confident, and didn't waste time sugarcoating things. "This is serious," she said, flipping through the documents I spread across her desk. "The financial misuse, the neighbor's testimony, the school records, and the doctor's diagnosis. This is a textbook case of neglect. We'll file for emergency custody." I swallowed hard. "They're my parents. This will destroy my family." Sophia looked me straight in the eye. "Evelyn, your niece nearly died. Do you want to give her back to them?" "No." My voice cracked, but it was steady. "I want her safe." So the paperwork began. Sophia drafted a petition outlining the evidence: medical neglect, malnutrition, and trauma documented by the hospital, educational neglect, absence from school, backed by official records, financial misuse, stipend squandered on luxuries, witness testimony, neighbors confirming abandonment and verbal mistreatment. Within days, a court date was set. When the summons reached my parents, the storm I feared erupted. My mother called me, her voice sharp as glass. "Evelyn, how dare you? You're trying to steal Zoe from us just to get the stipend money, aren't you?" I nearly laughed through my tears. "Steal her? You locked her in a room and left her to starve." My father's voice thundered in the background. "If you go through with this, you're no longer our daughter." I held the phone, my heart pounding, but I answered coldly, "Then so be it. I choose Zoe." The day of the hearing arrived like a storm all its own. The Nashville courthouse loomed tall, its stone steps slick with rain. I walked inside, gripping a folder of evidence, my stomach in knots. Marcus squeezed my hand. Emily stayed with a friend. This wasn't a place for children. In the courtroom, I sat beside Sophia, while my parents glared from across the aisle. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the part of the sorrowful grandmother. My father sat stiff, his jaw clenched in defiance. The judge entered, stern and unyielding. The hearing began. One by one, the evidence unfolded. Dr. Patel, the hospital physician, testified that Zoe's malnutrition had been ongoing for months, possibly years. Mrs. Carson recounted the nights of crying and the times Zoe had been left alone. Ms. Hayes presented the school records, her voice trembling with emotion. And finally, Sophia laid the bank statements before the court, pointing out every indulgence purchased while Zoe wasted away. When it was my turn to speak, I rose with shaking hands. Your Honor, I am not here for money or revenge. I am here because my niece was found starving, locked in a room, abandoned by the very people who swore to love her. I can't let her go back to that house. I want to give her the life she deserves, a safe home, an education, a family who will cherish her. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that Zoe was simply a picky eater and that I was exaggerating, but the evidence was overwhelming. After a tense silence, the judge delivered the ruling. Custody of Zoe Harper was granted to me, effective immediately. My parents' stipend was terminated, and Child Protective Services would monitor them for neglect. Tears blurred my eyes as the gavel struck. The weight lifted, but grief remained. I had won custody, but I had lost my parents. Still, when I returned to the hospital that evening and saw Zoe smile weakly as I told her, "You're coming home with me," I knew I had made the only choice that mattered. Bringing Zoe home felt both joyous and terrifying. As I buckled her into the back seat for the drive from Nashville to Lexington, her small hand clutched my sleeve like an anchor. She said little, only whispered once, "You won't let them take me back, will you?" I reached over and smoothed her hair. "Never, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're coming home." When we pulled into the driveway, Marcus and Emily were waiting at the door. Emily rushed forward, nearly tripping over herself, and wrapped Zoe in a hug. "You can share my room if you want," she announced proudly, as if she had been planning this moment all along. Marcus crouched down to Zoe's level, his voice gentle. "Welcome home, kiddo. You're part of our family now." Zoe's eyes shimmered with uncertainty, but for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of light there. The first weeks were difficult. Zoe woke often in the night, screaming from nightmares. I would find her curled in the corner of her bed, clutching her teddy bear and whispering, "Don't lock me up again." Each time, I gathered her in my arms, rocking her until her trembling stopped. "No one will ever lock you up again," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe with us." We sought help from Dr. Allison Pierce, a child psychologist known for her gentle approach. During therapy sessions, Zoe slowly opened up. She spoke in fragments at first, about the nights she was left alone, about being scolded when she cried, about the hunger that gnawed at her until sleep finally dragged her under. Each confession felt like a blade to my heart, but Dr. Pierce guided her gently, affirming that none of it had been her fault. At home, we tried to give Zoe back pieces of her childhood. Marcus filled the living room with music, strumming his guitar while the girls danced. Emily became fiercely protective, walking Zoe to school, introducing her proudly to friends. I stocked the kitchen with fruits and vegetables, but also cookies and ice cream, things that told her food was no longer something to fear. The change was slow, almost imperceptible at first, but after a few months, Zoe's cheeks began to fill out, her eyes grew brighter, and she laughed more often. That laugh, the one I remembered from her toddler years, was like sunlight pouring back into our home. I enrolled her in Bowling Green Elementary, the same school Emily attended. On her first morning, Zoe clung to my hand at the classroom door. "What if the teacher gets mad at me?" she whispered. I knelt to meet her eyes. "Your teacher will care about you. And Emily will be right here with you." Emily puffed out her chest proudly. "That's right. I'll protect you." Zoe gave a small, hesitant smile and stepped inside. Her teachers later told me she was shy but eager to learn, and with Emily by her side, she blossomed quickly. She loved art class, often coming home with bright, messy paintings. Marcus pinned everyone to the fridge, calling her our little Picasso. Still, the scars lingered. Sometimes, during storms, Zoe would crawl into my bed, trembling at the sound of thunder. Other times she'd grow quiet when the subject of grandparents came up. I didn't push her. Healing, I knew, was not a straight path, it was a winding road, with setbacks and small triumphs. Years passed quicker than I expected. Zoe turned 10, then 11, then 12. She grew tall, strong, and confident. Soccer became her passion, and Emily became her biggest cheerleader on the sidelines. At night, the two of them sprawled on the living room floor, whispering secrets only sisters could understand. One evening, after a particularly long day, Zoe hugged me tightly before bed. "Aunt Evelyn," she said, her eyes shining, You're the best mom in the world." Tears stung my eyes. "You already have a mom, sweetheart," I whispered, thinking of Rachel. "I know," she said softly. "But you saved me. You're my mom too." Her words filled me with both joy and sorrow. I thought of Rachel often, my once vibrant sister, lost to her own pain. Sometimes I wondered if she would ever come back, if she would ever know the girl Zoe had become. But even if she didn't, I had made her a promise. Zoe would be loved, protected, and cherished. My parents? I never reconciled with them. After the court case, the community whispered, and their friends drifted away. They lived in isolation, clinging to pride instead of remorse. Occasionally I heard updates through neighbors, but I didn't reach out. I had chosen Zoe. That was enough. Looking back, I realized the battle for Zoe wasn't just about custody papers or courtrooms. It was about love, about choosing responsibility over blood ties, about refusing to look away when a child needed me most. If I could give anyone advice from this journey, it would be this: listen to your instincts. I had seen the warning signs, the hollow cheeks, the lost eyes, and I wanted to believe the lies my parents fed me. It nearly cost Zoe her life. Family isn't about appearances or even blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who protects you when the storm rages outside. And for Zoe, I vowed, I would always be that person.